So the challenges that we faced were actually bringing people together. If you can imagine just how busy everybody is, particularly clinicians, trying to clear waiting lists, trying to treat as many patients as possible, and then talking to them about a model that predicts the future when they are trying to deal with the here and now was very, very difficult. So what we did was we gave them plenty of notice for the modelling event, and we provided them with as much information as we had about how it would work. And we got that mix because we got the mix of clinical and operational people together. If one or two didn't make it, it wasn't such a big deal. But then when we saw the modelling at the end, we could share that back with the clinical teams, even those that hadn't made it, and they could see the real benefits. And it was actually amazing what it did show us. And it created that enthusiasm then to continue getting involved and to identify other projects that and pilots that we would want to look at.
So I think one of the main challenges ties back to one of the advantages, really. It's all about working across the system and working with people we wouldn't normally work with. So speaking to clinicians that are running clinics isn't something that we normally do as analysts in an acute trust. We would rely on the data from the systems to tell us how many patients they'd seen in a given clinic. The challenge was finding those clinicians and getting the time with them to understand what their processes are and understand how they treat those patients and move them through the pathways. It's all well and good seeing it in numbers in terms of dates and patients seen on X date, but actually knowing that appointment was a follow-up to this appointment that happened on a previous visit. So knowing all that kind of thing was unusual for us as analysts, and reaching out to the right people and getting the right people involved was one of the major challenges. And it's all down to communication, reaching out and speaking to each other and knowing where you're going and who you're talking to. If you can get the right people to have the right conversations with, it makes the whole thing a lot easier.
So I think the challenges we had was finishing specialties. As a pilot, we would have moved on to the next stage quite early with a good enough model, but because the work was being dovetailed with some actual transformation, we found that there was a real push to get it right before we release things. So I think within a pilot, we would probably have tried to release the orthopedics a little bit earlier, but because it was part of the orthopedic transformation MSK program, they were really not happy to release it until they had all the terminology right. So I just felt it was a bit, because we tried to link it up, which just a bit of a struggle there. Another big challenge faced was I didn't get this model at all to start with, and I felt maybe 4 or 5 weeks before I fully understood what it meant, and I really struggled to kind of being able to articulate it out to people about what the benefits were, because I didn't quite get it myself. So I think it's really important to try and really get people to see it and visualize it a lot earlier than we did in our pilot. Another big challenge was obviously the last month was the redirection of the whole NHS, because it was December, vaccinations, Omicron. So yeah, we had to work out how we did the pausing mechanism. So how we had it, because we had 3 specialties. The first one, we got to the endpoint of orthopedics and released it. The ophthalmology, we've moved it more into a behind the scenes, so the BI teams can carry on while the front facing staff are all out there looking after the patients, and then we'll get them back in the room in February once hopefully things start settling down again. And then we promoted the pause in dermatology because it just fit with other pieces of work, but it was about being really honest about the fact that we did actually have to take a break at the end of the pilot. So I think those are the biggest challenges from my perspective and from the systems perspective.
So it's an operationally pressured time, both with COVID, elective recovery, winter pressures. Getting people engaged has been difficult. When we started off System Dynamics, we tried to get a huge amount of people together, clinicians, operational, admin and BI from each of the different providers linked to the specialty. And that meant gathering together 20 or 30 people. And clearly this was really difficult to manage. We had a number of meetings which were cancelled at the very last minute, or with so little attendance we couldn't make the work. What we started to do instead was adopt a different process where we identified a few core stakeholders, a clinician, a project manager, and ops lead, in order to work with us to build an initial model. That allowed us to change the way we ran those meetings by presenting something which was already in place and getting people engaged in a bit more detail by sending something out in advance. We also had to change our meeting times, so trying to take them outside clinic time, trying to do them in the evening, but that did give us the ability to get people together. I think one of the other challenges was making sure that this wasn't seen as a digitally led project. We wanted to make sure that this was seen as operational and strategic and clinical, giving people information to change their pathways, to change their processes, and allow them to do things in different ways. There are so many digital priorities at the moment that it's just seen as another piece of work otherwise, and that shouldn't be the case. This is completely an enabler for somebody else. I think the other challenge we have is around the informatics teams. They are massively pressured, and it's very difficult for analysts to be given that time from their senior leaders. It's not always seen as advantageous for an organisation to dedicate an analyst to a system piece of work, because that organisation doesn't see the benefit. I think taking it away, looking at the strategy, trying to actually buy in the whole team to understand the skills and where it will go has been really important for us. It's a constant challenge, but people are seeing the benefit of it, and people are considering different ways this could be used, both in their own organisation and as a wider system.